The mining station Kepler 442b hung in the void like a dying star, its hull scarred by plasma burns and meteor impacts. What had once been humanity's most remote outpost now served as a prison camp for the Zephyrian collective. The alien overlords had swept through human space 3 years ago with technology that made Earth's finest weapons look like sharpened sticks. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced viewing port of Processing Bay 7, watching another transport ship dock with their floating hell. The Zephyrians moved with fluid grace, their elongated limbs and translucent blue skin making them appear almost ethereal. Beautiful, if you could forget they had enslaved half the galaxy. "Another batch of meat for the grinder," muttered Sergeant Rodriguez from behind her. The veteran Marine's voice carried the exhaustion that had settled into every human soul on the station. They had been worked 16-hour shifts in the tritium mines, their bodies pushed beyond normal limits while their captors studied human endurance like lab rats. Sarah turned away from the window. The new arrivals would learn soon enough what awaited them. The Zephyrians were methodical in their cruelty, breaking spirits as efficiently as they extracted resources. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, each one now serving as specialized labor in their vast empire. Humans had been designated as miners and heavy laborers due to their surprising physical resilience and ability to work in hostile environments. The door to the bay hissed open, and Overseer Kethvar glided in. The Zephyrian's compound eyes fixed on Sarah with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Its translator device, a small disc attached to its throat, converted its melodic native language into harsh English. "Commander Chen, your work crews fell short of quota yesterday by 12%. This is unacceptable." Kethvar's voice carried no emotion, just the mechanical delivery of facts that would determine who lived and who became an example to the others. Sarah met the alien's gaze without flinching. She had learned that showing weakness only invited worse treatment. "My people are exhausted. We need rest periods if you want maximum efficiency." The overseer's head tilted at an unnatural angle, a gesture that never failed to unnerve the human prisoners. "Efficiency is not your concern. Obedience is. Perhaps a demonstration of consequences will motivate better performance." Before Sarah could respond, Kethvar activated a neural disruptor. The device sent waves of agony through her nervous system, dropping her to her knees as every nerve ending screamed in protest. Around the bay, other prisoners stopped their work to watch, their faces mixing fear with helpless rage. "You see?" Kethvar said conversationally as Sarah writhed on the metal floor. "Pain is a universal language. Your species may be stubborn, but you learn eventually." The alien deactivated the device, leaving Sarah gasping and trembling. "Tomorrow's quota is increased by 20%. See that your workers understand the price of disappointment." As the overseer glided away, Rodriguez helped Sarah to her feet. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to stand straight. Around them, the other prisoners had already returned to their tasks, knowing that lingering attention from their captors meant only suffering. "Sarah," Rodriguez whispered urgently, "the new arrivals in Bay 3. Word is spreading that there's someone special among them. Someone the guards are nervous about." Sarah wiped blood from where she had bitten her tongue during the neural disruption. "Special how?" "Military. Special forces, maybe. The Zephyrians have him in isolation, maximum security protocols. They're scared of him." This caught Sarah's attention. In 3 years of captivity, she had never seen the Zephyrians show fear of anything, least of all a single human. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's, their forces seemingly limitless. What could one man possibly do that would concern beings who had conquered star systems? That night, as the artificial lighting dimmed to simulate planetary cycles, Sarah made her way through the maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the station. These passages had become the prisoners' underground railroad, allowing communication and coordination away from alien surveillance. The Zephyrians knew about the tunnels, but seemed to consider them harmless, another sign of their arrogance. She found Rodriguez waiting near the junction that led to the high-security section. "I managed to get close to the isolation block," he whispered. "The guards are definitely spooked. They've got triple the normal detail, and they're all carrying heavy weapons." "Did you see him?" Rodriguez shook his head. "But I heard something interesting from one of the dock workers. When they brought him aboard, his transport was escorted by a full battle squadron. A whole squadron, Sarah. For one prisoner." The implications sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The Zephyrians didn't waste resources on theatrics. If they had committed that level of force to capturing one human, he had to be someone extraordinary. Military leadership, perhaps, or a scientist with knowledge they couldn't allow to remain free. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "The guards, when they think no one's listening, they keep mentioning a word in their language. The translator doesn't pick it up properly, but it sounds like Deathbringer or something similar." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Stories had circulated through the prisoner population for months now. Whispered tales of a human who had somehow struck back against the Zephyrians. Raids on supply convoys, sabotaged facilities, entire collective outposts going dark without explanation. The aliens had dismissed these as terrorist attacks by desperate remnants, but the prisoners had begun to hope that someone, somewhere, was still fighting back. The next morning brought news that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. During the shift change, a guard detail escorted their mysterious prisoner through the main corridor for transport to interrogation. Sarah positioned herself at a viewing port and caught her first glimpse of the man who had the entire Zephyrian command structure on edge. He was unremarkable at first glance, medium height and build, probably in his 30s. His dark hair was cropped military short, and despite weeks or months in captivity, he moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never truly been broken. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. They held a cold intelligence that seemed to catalog every weakness in his captor's security, every potential opportunity for violence. As he passed, surrounded by 6 heavily armed Zephyrians, he turned his head slightly and made eye contact with Sarah through the viewing port. For just a moment, she saw something that made her heart race with possibilities. Not resignation or defeat, but calculation. This man was planning something, and when it came, the Zephyrians were going to discover why their own forces whispered his name in their native tongue with something approaching fear. The prisoner convoy disappeared around a corner, but Sarah remained at the viewing port, her mind racing. After 3 years of grinding despair, a spark of hope had been ignited. Whatever was coming, she needed to be ready. The other prisoners needed to be ready. Because if the stories were true, if this man was who she thought he was, then the Zephyrians' reign of terror was about to face its first real challenge. That evening, Sarah gathered her most trusted allies in the deep maintenance sections. Rodriguez was there, along with Dr. Martinez from the medical bay, Chief Engineer Yates, and a dozen others who had maintained their fighting spirit despite years of captivity. They represented the core of human resistance on the station, a network that had been quietly growing while their captors focused on quotas and efficiency ratings. "I think we all saw the new prisoner today," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I think we all know what this might mean." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that might have been hope. "The stories we've heard about someone hitting back at the collective. You think it's him?" "I think the Zephyrians are scared," Sarah replied. "And in 3 years, I've never seen them scared of anything. That tells me we might be looking at our first real chance to fight back." Chief Yates, a grizzled engineer who had helped build the original mining station before its capture, nodded slowly. The question is, what do we do about it? We're still prisoners on a space station with no way off and no weapons worth mentioning. We prepare, Sarah said firmly. We organize, and we wait for our opportunity. Because if this man is planning something, he's going to need help. And when that moment comes, I intend for us to be ready to give it to him. The meeting broke up quietly, each member returning to their quarters through different routes. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the prison. Word spread through the underground network that help might be coming, that the endless cycle of suffering and degradation might finally be broken. Sarah lay on her narrow bunk that night, staring at the metal ceiling and thinking about the prisoner in isolation. Tomorrow would bring another day of back-breaking labor, another day of watching her people worn down by their alien captors. But now, for the first time in 3 years, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow with something other than dread. Because somewhere in the depths of the station, a man who had earned the fear of an entire alien empire was planning their liberation. And Sarah Chen was going to make sure that when the moment came, the humans of Kepler 442b would be ready to reclaim their freedom, no matter the cost. The interrogation chamber reeked of ozone and fear, its walls lined with neural interface ports that could extract memories directly from a subject's brain. Captain Marcus Reaper Kane sat motionless in the restraint chair, his wrists and ankles locked in energy shackles that would paralyze him with agony if he moved too quickly. He had been in this room for 6 hours now, watching his Zephyrian captors prepare their instruments with the methodical precision of surgeons. High Inquisitor Zexthul entered the chamber with the flowing grace typical of his species, his elongated form casting strange shadows under the harsh lighting. Unlike the common guards, this Zephyrian wore robes of deep purple that marked him as nobility within the collective hierarchy. His compound eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that suggested this interrogation was personal. "Captain Kane," Zexthul said, his translator rendering the words with clinical precision. "Or should I say, the infamous Reaper? Your reputation precedes you across 17 star systems." Marcus remained silent, his expression giving away nothing. 3 years of hit-and-run warfare against the collective had taught him the value of patience. Every moment they spent trying to break him was a moment his network remained free to operate. The High Inquisitor activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with images of destruction. Burning Zephyrian installations, sabotaged supply convoys, entire garrison forces found dead in their barracks with no sign of how the killer had entered or escaped. The aliens had given him the name Reaper after finding a pattern of surgical strikes that left no survivors and few clues. 47 successful operations against collective assets, Zexthul continued, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. Nearly 300 of our personnel eliminated, most of them killed with primitive human weapons. You have cost us resources worth billions of credits and delayed our expansion into the outer rim by months. The hologram shifted to show tactical analysis of Marcus's operations. Red lines traced infiltration routes. Blue markers indicated extraction points, and yellow zones highlighted areas where collective forces had been systematically eliminated. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, the work of someone who understood that victory wasn't about matching superior firepower, but about striking where the enemy was weakest. "What fascinates our military analysts," the High Inquisitor said, moving closer to the restraint chair, "is not what you accomplished, but how you accomplished it. Our intelligence suggests you operated with minimal resources, often alone, using equipment that our own forces would consider obsolete. Yet you consistently defeated units that should have been able to crush any human resistance." Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. Your forces are used to conquering primitives who panic when they see your pretty lights and advanced toys. You never learn to fight someone who hits back. Zexthul's head tilted in the unsettling way of his species. Indeed. Your success rate suggests either supernatural luck or intelligence gathering that should be impossible for an isolated resistance cell. We believe you had help from within our own organization. The accusation hung in the air like a threat. Marcus knew the Zephyrians were fishing for information about possible traitors in their ranks, trying to identify weak points in their command structure. The truth was both simpler and more complex than they imagined. His success had come not from alien conspirators, but from understanding his enemy better than they understood themselves. Your people have a weakness, Marcus said conversationally. You've conquered so many species that you've forgotten how to adapt. Your tactics, your security protocols, your operational procedures, they're all standardized across the galaxy. Once I figured out the patterns, it was just a matter of exploiting them. The High Inquisitor's compound eyes narrowed, a sign of anger in Zephyrian body language. Impossible. Our systems are updated constantly. Our security measures refined through centuries of conquest. Are they? Marcus leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. Tell me, Inquisitor, what's the standard guard rotation for a Class A military installation? Zexthul remained silent, but Marcus could see he had struck a nerve. 8-hour shifts, 6 guards minimum, patrol patterns that follow mathematical algorithms to ensure random coverage. Except the algorithms aren't random, they're just complex enough that most enemies can't predict them. But humans are good at finding patterns, especially when we have weeks to observe and months to plan. The truth was beginning to dawn on the alien interrogator. The collective's greatest strength, their systematic approach to conquest and control, had become a vulnerability when faced with an enemy who could think outside their paradigm. Marcus continued his psychological assault. Your communication protocols, your supply chain logistics, your personnel management systems, they're all optimized for efficiency across multiple species and star systems. That optimization creates predictable weaknesses, guard posts that are always undermanned at shift changes, supply convoys that follow trade routes instead of tactical routes, command structures that prioritize information flow over operational security. Zexthul activated a neural disruptor, sending waves of agony through Marcus's nervous system. The pain was excruciating, but the human had endured worse during his years of guerrilla warfare. He gritted his teeth and waited for the torture to pass. "You will tell us the location of your base of operations," the High Inquisitor demanded. "You will provide us with intelligence on your remaining network. You will help us eliminate the last vestiges of human resistance." Marcus laughed, a sound that seemed to unnerve his captor more than any show of defiance. "You still don't understand, do you? There is no base. There is no network. There's just me and the knowledge that your empire has a shelf life." The alien's translator struggled with the idiom, but the meaning was clear enough to provoke rage. Zexthul increased the power of the neural disruptor, flooding Marcus's system with artificial pain that should have broken any normal prisoner. But Marcus had learned to compartmentalize agony, to separate his mind from his body's suffering. It was a skill that had kept him alive through dozens of missions behind enemy lines. "Every species you've conquered," Marcus gasped between waves of neural fire, "eventually learns to fight back. The Andromedans figured out how to hack your computer systems. The Centaurans developed bioweapons that target your specific genetics. The vegan colonies created quantum jammers that disable your FTL communications. And now humans have learned something even more dangerous." "What?" Zexthul demanded, his composure finally cracking. "We've learned how to kill gods." The interrogation continued for hours, but Marcus revealed nothing of value. His capture had been planned, a necessary sacrifice to achieve a larger objective. While the Zephyrians focused their attention on breaking one man, Other pieces were falling into place across the galaxy. The reputation of the Reaper had spread beyond human space, inspiring resistance movements among dozens of subjugated species. His capture would only add to the legend, proving that even the collective's most feared enemy could bleed. As night fell across the artificial cycles of the space station, Marcus was finally returned to his isolation cell. The chamber was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, designed to break prisoners through sensory deprivation and hopelessness. But Marcus had spent months alone in asteroid fields and abandoned installations, learning to find peace in solitude. The Zephyrian's attempts at mental torture only gave him time to think and plan. Through the ventilation system, he could hear the distant sounds of the prison population. Thousands of humans worked in the mining operations, their spirits gradually crushed by years of servitude. But something had changed in the ambient noise of the facility. There was an undercurrent of tension, whispered conversations that suggested his presence had not gone unnoticed. Marcus smiled in the darkness of his cell. The first phase of his plan was already working. His capture had been deliberately conspicuous, designed to send a message to both his captors and his fellow prisoners. The Reaper was here, and his war against the collective was about to enter a new phase. The door to his cell hissed open, and a guard entered with his evening meal. The Zephyrian moved with nervous energy, its translucent skin showing signs of stress that Marcus had learned to read. The aliens thought they were the apex predators of the galaxy, but they had never faced an enemy who specialized in psychological warfare. "Your food, prisoner," the guard said in accented English, setting down a tray of the nutritional paste that served as sustenance for human slaves. "Thank you," Marcus replied politely, his tone so conversational that the guard paused uncertainly. "Tell me, how long have you been stationed here?" The alien's compound eyes flickered nervously. "You are not permitted to speak to guards." "Of course. I was just curious about your career progression. Guard duty on a mining station must be considered punishment detail for a warrior species like yours." The Zephyrian stiffened at the implied insult. "I serve where the collective requires. My assignment is honorable." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure it is, though I imagine your superiors see it differently. After all, if you were truly trusted, you'd be assigned to a frontline position instead of watching over broken humans on a backwater station." The guard's skin began to shift color, a sign of agitation that Marcus noted with satisfaction. "The human prisoners are dangerous. We maintain vigilance against escape attempts and sabotage." "Dangerous?" Marcus laughed softly. "I've seen your prisoner population. They're broken, defeated, working themselves to death in your minds. What possible threat could they represent to the mighty Zephyrian collective?" The alien guard realized he was being manipulated and backed toward the door. But the damage was done. Marcus had planted seeds of doubt that would grow in the guards' minds, making them question their own security measures and second-guess their procedures. Psychological warfare wasn't about breaking the enemy's spirit. It was about making them break themselves. As the cell door sealed behind the departing guard, Marcus began his evening routine of physical exercises designed to maintain conditioning in the confined space. His body was a weapon that required constant maintenance, and his upcoming plans would demand every ounce of his physical capability. But more important than his personal fitness was the growing network of communication he was establishing throughout the station. Through carefully orchestrated interactions with guards, medical staff, and maintenance workers, he was gathering intelligence on security protocols, personnel schedules, and structural vulnerabilities. The Zephyrians thought they had captured their greatest enemy, but they had actually brought him inside their most sensitive installation. The next morning would bring new opportunities to advance his plan. The High Inquisitor would return with more sophisticated torture devices, convinced that enough pain could crack any prisoner's resolve. But Marcus had endured 3 years of warfare against impossible odds, learning that victory sometimes required accepting defeat as a tactical necessity. The Reaper had come to Kepler 442b not as a prisoner, but as a catalyst. And soon, the Zephyrian Collective would learn why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat as anything more than a temporary setback. The maintenance tunnels beneath Kepler 442b hummed with activity that had nothing to do with scheduled repairs. Sarah Chen crawled through a ventilation shaft barely wide enough for human shoulders, following intelligence reports that had filtered through the prisoner network over the past week. The mysterious prisoner in maximum security had been sending signals, somehow communicating with the general population, despite being held in complete isolation. She emerged into a junction chamber where Rodriguez waited with 3 other resistance members. Their faces showed the exhaustion of people who had been working double shifts while planning something that could get them all killed, but their eyes held a determination that Sarah hadn't seen in years. "The pattern is confirmed," Rodriguez whispered, consulting a hand-drawn map of the station's security rotations. "Every 3rd day, the guard detail changes shifts at 300 hours. For exactly 12 minutes, the isolation block has minimum coverage while the new team gets briefed." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her medical training evident in how she examined the tactical situation like a diagnosis. "I've been monitoring the medical bay's supply inventory. Someone has been requisitioning unusual items, surgical tools, chemical compounds, electronics components that don't match any standard medical procedures." "The Reaper," Chief Engineer Yates said simply. "He's been gathering resources through the guards themselves, making them think they're following standard protocols while he builds whatever he needs for his plan." Sarah felt a chill of anticipation mixed with fear. 3 years of captivity had taught her that hope was dangerous, that the Zephyrians had contingencies for every form of resistance their prisoners might attempt. But the evidence suggested that Marcus Kane was operating on a completely different level than anything they had imagined possible. "What do you think he's planning?" she asked. Rodriguez pulled out a crude schematic drawn on stolen paper. "Based on the items he's been acquiring and the security weaknesses he's been probing, I think he's going to try something during the next major transport operation. There's a collective battle cruiser arriving tomorrow to pick up processed tritium. The station's defenses will be reconfigured to accommodate the docking, which creates temporary vulnerabilities." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. A battle cruiser represented enough firepower to sterilize the entire station if its crew felt threatened. Whatever Marcus was planning, it would have to be precise enough to avoid triggering a massacre of the prisoner population. "We need to coordinate with him," she decided. "If he's going to make his move, our people need to be ready to support it or at least stay out of the way." Getting a message to Marcus Kane proved easier than expected. The Zephyrian guards had become complacent about their human prisoners, treating them as broken livestock rather than potential threats. Dr. Martinez volunteered to make contact during her scheduled medical rounds, using her access to the isolation block to deliver a carefully coded message. She returned 2 hours later with information that changed everything. "He's not planning an escape," she reported to the assembled resistance leaders. "He's planning a takeover, the entire station. He wants us to be ready to seize critical systems when he gives the signal." The audacity of it left them speechless. Kepler 442b was a fortress, defended by automated systems and a garrison of elite Zephyrian warriors. The idea that a single human prisoner could orchestrate its capture seemed like the fantasy of a madman. But Marcus Kane was not a madman. His message had included detailed intelligence on security vulnerabilities, guard rotations, and system backdoors that the prisoners had never discovered in 3 years of captivity. He had been observing and planning with the methodical precision of a professional soldier, turning his captivity into an opportunity for reconnaissance. The next 18 hours passed in frantic preparation. Using their knowledge of the station's infrastructure, the human engineers identified critical control nodes that could be seized by small teams. Medical personnel stockpiled supplies for treating casualties. Security specialists planned diversions to draw Zephyrian forces away from key objectives. Every prisoner with relevant skills was given a role in what Sarah privately thought of as the most desperate gamble in human history. As the collective battlecruiser approached Kepler 442b, its massive bulk visible through the station's viewing ports, Sarah found herself in the central command tunnel with Rodriguez and 20 other volunteers. They carried improvised weapons and stolen access codes, ready to attempt something that should have been impossible. The signal came at 0347 hours, just as the battlecruiser completed its docking sequence. Every light in the isolation block went out simultaneously, followed by the distinctive sound of energy weapons discharging in rapid succession. Emergency alarms began wailing throughout the station as the Zephyrian security forces mobilized to respond to what they assumed was a standard prisoner riot. But this was no riot. Marcus Kane had spent weeks studying his captors' emergency protocols, learning exactly how they would respond to different types of incidents. The darkness in the isolation block triggered specific evacuation procedures that drew guards away from other critical areas, creating the openings his allies needed. Sarah's team reached the primary life support controls just as planned. Chief Engineer Yates connected his homemade interface to the Zephyrian computer systems, exploiting backdoors that Marcus had identified during his interrogations. Within minutes, they had control of atmospheric processors, gravity generators, and environmental systems throughout the station. In the medical bay, Dr. Martinez's team seized the communications array that coordinated with orbital defenses. Their knowledge of Zephyrian medical procedures allowed them to access restricted networks under the pretense of emergency medical protocols. Soon, they were broadcasting false status reports that kept the battlecruiser's crew unaware of the developing crisis. The engineering teams struck at power distribution nodes, using their intimate knowledge of the station's infrastructure to disable systems in a carefully orchestrated sequence. The Zephyrians had relied on human labor to maintain their installation, never considering that this dependence made them vulnerable to sabotage from within. But the most critical operation was unfolding in the command center, where Marcus Kane had somehow escaped his restraints and was systematically eliminating the station's senior officers. Security footage that Sarah glimpsed later would show him moving through the facility like a force of nature, using improvised weapons and hand-to-hand combat techniques that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The Zephyrians had called him Reaper because of his ability to kill without leaving evidence of how he had penetrated their defenses. Now they discovered that his reputation was, if anything, understated. He moved through their supposedly impregnable command center like a shadow, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before security forces could respond. High Inquisitor Zexthul died in his private chambers, killed with a weapon fashioned from medical equipment that Dr. Martinez had smuggled to Marcus during her supposed medical visits. The station commander fell in the main control room. His security detail eliminated so efficiently that the automated systems initially registered their deaths as equipment malfunctions. Within 6 hours, the humans controlled Kepler 442b completely. The Zephyrian garrison had been neutralized, their command structure decapitated, their communications systems compromised. The battlecruiser remained docked and unaware, its crew following routine protocols for a supply pickup that was proceeding exactly as scheduled according to their instruments. Sarah found herself standing in the main command center, looking out at the stars through viewing ports that had shown only captivity for 3 years. Around her, former prisoners worked frantically to consolidate their impossible victory, securing weapons, accessing databases, and establishing defensive positions for the inevitable counterattack. Marcus Kane stood at the central command console, his prison uniform replaced with Zephyrian military gear that he wore with casual authority. He was checking status reports and issuing orders with the calm efficiency of someone who had planned for every contingency. Blood stained his hands and uniform, evidence of the violence that had been necessary to achieve their freedom, but his expression showed no satisfaction, only grim determination. "What happens now?" Sarah asked him. Marcus looked up from the tactical displays, his eyes holding depths that spoke of horrors witnessed and prices paid in humanity's secret war against the collective. "Now we send a message. The Zephyrians have spent 3 years trying to break human spirits, turning our people into slaves and lab rats. It's time they learned what humans do when you push us too far." He activated the station's long-range communications array, broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every collective installation within 50 light years. The message was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. "This is Captain Marcus Kane, formerly of Earth Special Forces, currently commanding the liberated station Kepler 442b. To all Zephyrian military commanders receiving this transmission, know that your conquest of human space has entered a new phase. You have awakened something that your empire was not prepared to face." The broadcast included tactical data on collective security vulnerabilities, detailed intelligence on their military procedures, and most damaging of all, proof that a single human could seize one of their most secure installations. Within hours, the message would spread across the galaxy, reaching resistance cells and subjugated populations who had thought themselves powerless against Zephyrian technology. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to the command console and began entering authorization codes that would activate the station's mining charges, powerful explosives designed to break apart asteroid fields for easier resource extraction. The battlecruiser was still docked, its crew unaware that their routine supply mission had become a trap. "They'll send a fleet to retake this station," he explained to Sarah. "When they arrive, they'll find debris and a mystery that will haunt their command structure for generations. Every installation, every transport, every garrison will wonder if they're next. Fear is a weapon, Commander Chen, and I intend to use it." Sarah watched the countdown timer on the demolition charges, understanding that their victory was also their funeral. But she felt no regret, only a satisfaction that burned brighter than the coming explosion. They had proven that humans could fight back, that the collective's empire was not as invincible as it appeared. The timer reached 0, and Kepler 442b became a star for exactly 3 seconds, its destruction visible across the entire system. The battlecruiser vanished in the same instant, along with its crew of 3,000 Zephyrian military personnel who never knew what had killed them. The shockwave from the explosion carried Marcus Kane's final message across the galaxy. Humans were no longer content to be victims. The Reaper had returned from the dead, and he was teaching his species that even gods could bleed when mortals refused to kneel. In the aftermath, as debris scattered across the void where a prison had once stood, the legend began to grow. Stories spread through the underground networks of a dozen species about the humans who had turned their captivity into a weapon, who had transformed their suffering into the first victory against an empire that had seemed unstoppable. The Zephyrian collective would learn too late that they had made a fatal error in their conquest of Earth. They had assumed that breaking human bodies would break human spirits, that overwhelming technological superiority would guarantee permanent subjugation. Instead, they had created an enemy that specialized in the impossible, a species that treated defeat as nothing more than a learning experience. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the conquest began, humanity had hope. And in a galaxy where hope had become the rarest commodity of all, that single spark would soon ignite a revolution that would shake the foundations of the greatest empire in galactic history.